Hi, my name is Morgan Gowdy, and today I will be presenting on toxic masculinity in the red pill community and in the men's rights community, mostly focusing on Reddit online. So I chose this topic because I have always had an interest in niche communities and because I have always had an interest in taboo topics. And I identify as an intersectional feminist, so I like to see the different sides of everything. I just decided to go for it. So first I decided that I should probably define some things before we get started. So according to its own glossary on Reddit, Red Pill identifies itself as the recognition and awareness that feminism, feminists, and their white knight enablers affect society, and they say that they are extremely politically incorrect. An alpha is a socially dominant somebody who displays high value or traits that are sexually attractive to women. A beta, they show provisional traits, mostly giving or providing, specifically to women. They show low sexual market value to women, and anyone who is biologically female, regardless of gender identity, is identified as a woman. So for my corpus, I analyzed 20 articles and their comment sections, which total 278 pages. And over these 278 pages, the word alpha was mentioned 212 times, the word beta was mentioned 170 times, and the word woman was mentioned 488 times. I focused on these because these words are what the community mostly identifies with, and it was interesting to see how they subbed pronouns out for beta and alpha, and how they referred to women as multiple names, but I felt like woman was the easiest to say in a presentation. So this is just a little bar chart to show the disparities between mentionings in something that is considered a men's rights movement or men's rights activists. They identify as that. They mention women almost more than twice the time that they mention themselves. And they mention betas, who are technically less than alphas, even more. It's also important to note that betas and alphas are fluid, and you can be a beta and have alpha traits, or you can be an alpha and have beta traits. It's not based on exactly who you are, but more of a sum of the whole. So for my specific articles that I focused on out of the 20, I focused on the updated glossary of terms and acronyms by a user named Machiavellian Red, for obvious reasons, because I needed to understand what they were talking about within their own language and be able to use it myself. I looked at their link flares, and then, so their link flares are subsets of forums on the page, and I focused on red pill theory just because it was the easiest to understand and the easiest to access, and there was more than 20 articles available. I read the rules to make sure that I wasn't breaking anything, to make sure that they would be okay with it, and there were no rules about me printing out or using anyone's username. They also said, which I thought was interesting, they have a rule about posting sexless comments. But it didn't mention anything about men, it just said that women are not supposed to identify themselves as such. Your words are supposed to stand on your own. You're not supposed to say, as a woman, I think. You're not supposed to qualify with your gender or sex. But they did not say the same thing about men within their rules. The first big article that I read was How to Thrive in Upside Down Clown World by Gay Lube Oil, who left a lot of comments throughout all 20 threads that I read. This one in particular was 42 pages long, and basically talked about how colleges are becoming feminized and how they're becoming warehouses for minorities. So I was very angry when I read this because it explained how a lot of people, mostly white men, are claiming minority status in order to get college paid for. And as someone who had a lot of financial aid problems this semester, trying to do it honestly, was very upset. They also talked about how women's studies were not like was not a real major. They talked about how feminism was not like a real thing, even though within the realm of Red Pill, it is trying to combat feminism. So I also found it interesting that within this thread particularly, they talked a lot about logos, pathos, and ethos. They had a very lengthy conversation about philosophy of arguing and rhetoric. They also talked about Marxist and Leninist views, postmodernist literature, prison culture. They talked about a lot of different things that I didn't think were related, but throughout the comments you could see that they were having a respectful discussion within their group about these specific topics. And it was interesting to me to see how they turned these topics into things that either didn't agree with them or agreed with them. The next one that I read that was interesting to me was Frame for Dummies, What It Is and Ways to Build It and Keep It by WRT230H. So this one was very interesting for me personally because it talked a lot about male body image. And you hear a lot in the media about female body image, but male body image is normally set to the side. They have a lot of issues with body image because they perpetuate a toxic masculinity of trying to be a perfect 10. The most heartbreaking comment I read was by a man in India who his username was redacted in the comments, so I don't exactly know who it was. But he said that he could never be a perfect 10 because he wasn't white. And that was like really sad to me that he couldn't be happy with himself because he wasn't white. And all of these other people, they came to his defense and said, well, you can always be close to a 10, but there's a hint of xenophobia, there's a very big hint of white supremacy within these comments. And they also talked about how Rollo Tomassi, who has written many books on the subject, how he would never fake frame. And frame is when you can hold your own against a group of people. So a lot of these men will go and go to the gym for 4 hours and lift, come home and do their own work, go to bed, eat their own thing, and continue until they have their own schedule, and a woman would just come into that schedule and not mess it up. So it's basically, to quote everyone in the comments, not giving an F about anything else except for yourself. But I thought that it was really interesting. I've really been interested in body image of everybody, but this one specifically about cisgender males. And their demographics are from the mostly college-age, white, conservative men who are between 18 and 27. So these, mostly children, you're still kind of a child at 18, are like reading this and seeing how they'll never be perfect because they're either not white or they don't lift enough or they don't have an ideal body image. So for my scholarship, I read 10 articles, but for this presentation I'm only going to be talking about 2 of them. The first one was Phallic Effect, or Why Men's Rights Activists Have Feelings by Jonathan A. Allen. And he is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Queer Theory and Assistant Professor of Gender and Women's Studies at Brandon University, who does a lot of things with queer gender studies. He has he has published works. And he quoted, the problem with these feelings is that they are expressed in the form of anger and violence, and what they are about, I believe, is a loss of control, a threat not caused by feminism, but by the apparent loss of entitled masculinity, a masculinity that affords power for no apparent reason other than biology is destiny. And his whole entire paper was about how men's rights activists use their feelings as a way to defend themselves. They don't use it as a way to let others in. He likened it to being circumcised and castrated, how they felt like they had no power because all of the power that they've had up to this point has been either diminishing or changing. It's not that they don't, he even notes that it's not that they don't have power, it's just that they have less and they don't know what to do. It's like being a caged animal in a zoo, but you were caught from captivity. So I also thought that this study was really interesting because he talked a lot about different literature that he's read on the subject, and he also talked a lot about literature from red pill and men's rights activists. He says that the men's rights movement is largely interested in preserving those arenas of all male havens, from Michael Kimmel in 2010, who's a big men's rights activist. And my second and final journal that I read was Masculinities in Cyberspace, an analysis of portrayals of manhood in men's rights activist websites by Rachel M. Schmitz and Emily Kaziak. This was very important to me, mostly because I focused exactly on what they were talking about. And it was very interesting. They analyzed how they talked about women in particular, and they said that they use women as commodities, which I saw every single article, no matter if women were the subject or not. They were always brought up. The end game of Red Pill Reddit is to sleep with as many women as you want and not get into a long-term relationship and just use your power. Some of them even advocated for rape, or they didn't call it rape, they called it regret rape. They advocated for other sexual violences, stalking, very aggressive sexual behavior. And within this, they said that as a form of backlash against feminism and the movement towards gender equality, MRAs, men's rights activists, seek to establish resources for men to utilize in maintaining their elevated position in society in relation to women and other social minorities. I also saw social minorities being brought up a lot. Being Jewish was brought up as an insult. Being autistic was brought up as an insult. Like if something was said that was out of left field or crazy, they would say that it's autistic, which I wasn't a huge fan of. And they also said that the representations of masculinity on the internet are reaching further than they had originally thought. They said that online spaces can also serve to impede social change or perpetuate normative understandings of masculinity. For instance, online gaming groups have been documented as exhibiting notorious misogyny through their exclusive male membership base that serves to exclude female gamers by creating hostile and sometimes hateful interactive environments towards women. So for this whole entire journal, they just talked about how masculinity in cyberspace is a self-feeding monster where it just feeds into itself and creates a more toxic space for these men to live in. In conclusion, I had a really nice time with this project. I really loved it, and I hope to take it further. I have 75 more articles at home that I have already gone through, but I think that these men have honest and real problems. It's just that they are coming about it in an aggressive way, and I would love to go further. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan.